Hey everyone, I'm here today with Nadine Shehaiber, seasoned HR executive with 20 plus years of experience driving organizational culture, global employee engagement, and DE&I initiatives. As Chief People Officer of BLG Capital Advisors and founding member of the People Collective, she builds high-performing teams, aligns stakeholders around shared visions, and designs human-centered strategies that help employees thrive and organizations succeed. Colleagues call her the one that gets things done. So welcome, Nadine. Nice to have you here today.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, no, it's great to connect again. And, we were talking a little bit about, family offices, about, obviously BLG is a family office, but you've got some experience in family offices now. So how do you view, doing your work in people and culture when you go into a family office environment, and not particular to your current employer, but just in general, like how's it different from corporate? What has been your initial thoughts?
It's let me tell you, it was a huge learning curve. I come from very big worlds as my background in corporate, and going from a place that had hundreds of thousands of employees to a place that is roughly 100, which really is kind of the size of a family, was very, very different. And then the nuance that you have to deal with, the red tape, the bureaucracy, politics around leadership, all of that doesn't really exist so much in a family office. And it's predominantly because they're not necessarily subject matter experts in your space. They really hire you and trust you to do the work that they need you to do. So they kind of stay out of your way, but there is a lot around you having to educate them and kind of bringing them on the journey and really kind of figuring out what is it that they're trying to do and build so that you can meet them where they're at versus kind of throwing everything at them. From a culture perspective, it does feel very much familial in a way. It's a lot more close-knit. People do tend to kind of just connect faster. It was much easier for me to build relationships in this environment than it was in some of the previous companies that I was in. It's not as siloed. So, being like in a bigger company where you're like departmental and you may not get to work with someone or see anyone unless you're part of a project. It's not like that in the family office. It's much more kind of broken down. Everybody works with everybody connects with everybody kind of thing. So it's been very pleasant, but also a learning curve to really adjust how we typically build in a larger organization and take things and really synthesize and really kind of bring them down to the level of meeting the stakeholders where they're at.
So, and just full transparency here, you used to work at Deloitte, so obviously huge organization, right?
Yep.
A lot of levels. It's just so big. And I've had friends that work there as well. So, but you learn systems, right? In the big corporate, they have their workflows already laid out. Well, you'd hope anyways. And, very organized kind of system. Like, you want approvals. And I can just give you my experience from working in a large corporation where you want approval for something in Workday, you're getting 7 people to sign off at every level. It's ridiculous. So I imagine at the family office, it's like, hey, Dad, can we get sign off on the budget? Just making a joke. But basically, it's a little bit, you have line of sight. You have a little bit easier to navigate some of the stuff, right?
Well,
But
luckily,
there's
you're
also
kind
some
of the
challenges,
person.
right?
Yeah, I would say, yes, you're correct. In a larger organization, I was in HR or talent management, but there's a department for learning and development. They do all the learning and development. We take it, implement. There's a department for compensation. You take their process, you implement. Where in the current environment that I'm in, or the family office that I'm in, it's us. It's me and my team of 2. And we're building, we're executing, we're planning. The checkbox is really just the CEO, and then more so the executive leadership team of making them aware versus getting their approval. So yes, it's very different. I'm in an environment where I'm not so connected with the family side, as we've kind of divided it up to have the professional side and then the family side. And so I focus more on the professional side of the business versus the family. So I'm not interacting as much with the family, but the CEO is actually part of the family. So he is my line of sight into the family. And if anything needs to run by them, he's the one that's taking it and front running it.
So what would be some advice maybe to people that are going to be going into a family office? And it doesn't have to be pertaining to your current employment, but just in general, like there's obviously some positives, better access maybe for
Mm-hmm.
decision makers and less bureaucracy and red tape. And there's a lot of positives. There's also potential pitfalls, right? In terms of like the people and culture aspect of like going into a family office and navigating that. I imagine there could be potential, and this is just my thoughts, right? Potential for culture issues where there's the family may be potentially hiring the same kind of people that are like them, that because they're like, let's extend the family is kind of the idea. Like we all want to be family. So invite friends of friends, cousins are inviting their friends, and eventually becomes an extended family of people that they all know each other at some
Mm-hmm.
point. And I can imagine if you're involved in people and culture, that can also create problems potentially for diversity of thought. Hiring by referral, I'm always kind of skeptical of a little bit, because people are hiring based on their own biases of, oh, this person's great and they work with us, but they're probably also in our social circle. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
How do you corporatize? How do you corporatize going into a family office and corporatizing that, where you know there would be some pushback, I'd imagine, in general,
I'll
right?
speak. I mean, my experience is purely to the one that I'm in right now. I'm sure they all differ in some capacity, and I've
Yeah.
actually heard that they differ. I think it just depends on how much involvement does a family have in the office. I would say ours isn't as quote unquote involved. Now, the CEO is the family, so I would say very involved because he's their voice. But I haven't personally seen a lot of that in the hiring. We also haven't done a ton of hiring. So, what I would say from the corporatizing our professional services side, they were already running as a corporation. The family that I work for used to own and run Cancer Treatment Centers of America. And so they were already kind of a corporation. They were hundreds of thousands of employees. And then once they sold that off, and they went a little bit more private, they kind of lost their sense of purpose. They lost their sense of identity and kind of what they wanted to do. And so my role was coming in and kind of helping reshape and rebuild that in some capacity.
Okay.
And so they had it already in a sense of what they knew was good. It was just more about taking it from good to great. And so my, I would say, benefit was that they had an idea. My difficulty was, how do I take what I know as great from my time at either Deloitte or Blackstone or some of the other organizations that I worked with, which is like so big, and bring it to them in such a small, bite sized manner. And that takes a lot of adjustment. And you have to go slow, you have to go their pace, which is again something you probably aren't used to in a bigger organization. You need to do a lot of education. I think you need to tie a lot to ROI. We're not doing things for the sake of doing them and checking the box and saying this is because of this is how it's done. You build with purpose versus build to build. So that's been kind of something that has been both really rewarding because it's kind of retraining my brain, even if I go back and when I go back to a larger organization, to really push and question everything versus we're doing it because we do it because this is why we have to have a performance management system. We have to have a,
Yeah.
right? So like pushing back and questioning and really finding the ROI and the purpose behind it and tying everything to the business.
I can imagine the experience in Deloitte helped you with sort of the consulting piece of how you
Absolutely.
consult, and we call it like managing upwards expectation and advocating for your programs.
Absolutely. Yeah. But even at Deloitte, like they would hire Deloitte because they knew we had the best of the best, right? And so they would
Yeah.
sometimes just be like, we just want what you have, replicate. But then when you try to help them understand the whys and that it was almost like they didn't care, they just wanted it. Versus this, where it's a very purposeful on, we are a family of or we're a team of 100. Do we really need a performance management system? Why can't we just talk to each other and figure out how to, right? Like, so they push you, they question it, and it's great because it's allowing us to redesign everything with a human centric lens and a purposeful lens versus we're implementing something that's been tried, true, and perfected.
I totally get that. And I mean, it's not one size fits all, which I think can sometimes happen when you're implementing new things, right? So that totally makes sense. So, for people that are like coming into these smaller, like 100 people organizations, like what would you typically recommend in terms of like, here's the first three things I would do
Yeah.
coming into a small medium business, 100 people. They have minimal HR kind of going on. They probably have one HR person, and And they're like, oh, we finally got, Bamboo or something going for our, payroll and, whatever. What would you say is the first three things you'd want to tackle?
One, I would say be open, no judgment. Like completely be open to everything they're saying, everything you're learning. Don't judge based on your past experience, or don't be like, at Deloitte, we used to do da 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 da. They're not interested so much in that. They want somebody that they know is here to listen to them and really build alongside with them. So just be open and don't judge, because I'm sure that you're going to see a lot of things that you're like, oh my gosh, how are they doing this? Or they're still doing paper or whatever, right? Number two, I would say spend as much time as you can getting to know the people and building the relationships and creating rapport so that you can start to build trust. Once they trust you and they know why you're there and what you're doing, it's a much easier process versus you trying to roll things out and build the trust at the same time and get them on board with what you're doing. I think because there's much smaller group and they've probably been there together longer, I can't place more emphasis on build the relationships than anything else at that point. And then for the third piece, I would say kind of almost take everything you know and throw it out the window and really build, like I said earlier, for their needs versus what you know they or what you think they need.
So it's kind of like create the customized solution and make sure you have buy-in
Yeah.
with the people that you're going to roll this custom solution out to, because
100%, which is
yeah,
a huge part of that is get to know the business, right? Like as you're building relationships, some of the most important things you should be knowing or developing is your knowledge on the business. What is it that they do? How do they do it? What are their pitfalls? What are their, where do they need help? Where do they need support? Like you're learning the business and how they conduct their business. So when you build, you're building for them versus what you know and what you've done in the past.
in the stuff that you've built out, let's say, have you seen a big difference between like how it would apply to like a team of 100 versus a team of 1,000, like in terms of certain things? I know like you don't need all the bells and whistles if it's a smaller team, but there's some things I'm sure that big noticeable differences you've seen. You're like, yeah, we totally avoided doing this. This is not a problem right now. This is a later problem or a
Mhm.
scale up problem that we'd need to implement later.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
anything
I
like
came
that?
into kind of almost green grass fields. The only thing they really had going was kind of like a payroll function.
Yeah,
So everything we built, I mean, including our brand, our vision, our mission, our values, that was all built when I came in.
nice.
I would say we kept everything super simple. Simple equals scalable. And so we went in with like, okay, this is how you typically run, let's call performance management, a performance management process. There's multiple check-ins mid-year end, there's rating systems, there's this, there's that, right? Like what do we really need out of this to just at least start to get the practice going versus throwing everything at them at once. And then every year we could add a piece of it that might kind of help with the goal of it becoming a behavior. And then you no longer need all these systems in place because now you've created the behavior and it's just instinctual for people to go and have a conversation with their manager about their performance or their goals or their development. And so something simple like that, like I took a look at how do we traditionally run performance management and how does that tie into compensation, how does that tie into job leveling, how, all of that. And then we just took chunks and pieces of it that we simplified and we roll it out in phases so that again we're just creating the behavior in the organization.
And it takes time to change people's behavior, right? Like changing culture. If they're not used to a coaching piece, it could take a while. Like a perfect example was I was at this big corporation. They rolled out, all of a sudden they said, you know what? We're getting rid of the three strikes, three write up rule and three write up and you're fired kind of thing.
Gosh,
And
that was still a
instead,
rule.
yeah, instead of that, we're now doing constant coaching. So every week you'll have or every 2 weeks or every month, you'll have a meeting with your manager. It'll be documented, and it's a constant coaching piece now. And everyone thought, oh, they're just trying to build a case against everybody so they can fire us whenever they want, right? There was pushback. It was like, hey, hold the phone. Why do I got to meet with? Why does it have to be documented? Why do I need to sign off on this every month? Like,
Yeah.
and there was so much fear about this program. I'm telling you, people were like, oh, they're just trying to have files on us so they can just boot us whenever they want, right?
Yeah.
instead of the mentality of, no, we want to be constantly checking in, we want to be constantly giving you feedback both ways, we want to make sure you have notes so you can go back and see what we talked about, so you can like keep top of mind our coaching and be more of a coach, like player coach relationship with your manager, instead of just, oh, punishment, like you're getting a write up and then you're gone kind of thing.
Yeah.
It was really hard. That was really hard to change that culture, because before it was, oh, you don't want to get a write up. Oh boy, you get that second one there, you're on your way out. That was the whole thing.
Culture is
So
a very tricky thing. I mean, on
yeah,
average, to change one thing in culture really takes about 3 to 5 years for the behavior to stick. That's like a traditional, just think of any piece of the culture that you want to change. And that's, normal, I would say, in large organizations. We would say when we were changing that at like Deloitte, it's like a huge ship in the middle of the ocean, a cruiser that you're trying to shift. And it's going to take a hot minute for it to really adjust and go to the direction that you want it to go in. In a smaller organization, you can adjust it quickly, but you have to prime the organization for change. And you have to understand where the subcultures exists and where the resistance may exist, and understand the whys behind that, and try to find that common thread that would really help tie it all together and bring everybody on that journey. So you have a lot more upfront work than you would in, I think, a larger organization where like change is kind of inevitable. In a smaller organization, you really have to make sure that you're priming the organization for that change. And that was a big part of the work that we did here, is that we're here to help make us more mature as an organization. We're here to professionalize us a little bit more. We're here to make us all better. And so helping them understand the why was critical, and then giving them the examples on how we're going to get there together was important, and then spending that face-to-face time and really understanding the subcultures that existed, because we also operate off in the islands. That's like a whole other culture down there that we needed to better understand and figure out how did that tie into our offices here in Chicago, and what are some of the nuances that we have to work through, what are the challenges, and how would people react to something that we're trying to do differently in either of the locations. So lots of priming.
yeah, no, makes sense. There's a lot to be done for sure. And how do you work with sort of the whole engagement scores piece, right? That's something we hear a lot about. What's your engagement score, your
Yeah.
employee engagement? Like post COVID, I know I was reading stats, like the engagement scores went down so much
Yeah.
from, I think, from COVID, from isolation and everything else. And I'm not sure, everyone will debate the return to office mandate, how that helped with engagement or ruined it. I think a lot of people checked out once they heard they had to go back.
Yeah.
So, what's your thoughts on engagement scores in general, and just how they've been sort of, let's say, on a decline in the last few years?
Yeah, I think Gallup just reported record lows in active engagement since the
Yeah.
2020, since COVID. And it's what's interesting is it's consistent like across industries, but predominantly shows up in that like mid-level and the hybrid workforce. And so when you talk about return to work, there's a huge disconnect that's happening between those that are working remotely and working in the office, because many did come back. And so you're seeing that decline in the connection between those two groups. That's where the whole quiet quitting comes out, and the low discretionary efforts are now visible, and companies are coming out with productivity measures, and how do we tie that to ROIs, and how it's becoming a lot more check the box versus really understanding the why behind it. And I think honestly, if you're just running an engagement survey, you're not really getting the true full story, because many stop answering those at some point in a honest fashion, because they're kind of tired of being asked if they don't see the change. And so there has to be multi mechanisms to really understanding your scores and where the disconnect is coming from. And once you get the scores, what happens after that, the deep dives, the checking in with the employees, the better understanding of the connection points between the question and how they answered it, and all of that, right? Because there's a ton of work that goes into that. And hopefully you're open two-way communication. But I think from what we've seen, and that's not true to the organization I'm in, because they're actually the opposite, we are much more of a in the office kind of culture. We do have obviously people that work remotely, or the opportunities for teams to work remotely, we're not in 5 days a week, but because most of the time we spend is in the office, we don't necessarily see a lot of this. But there's a huge disconnect from what I've seen since COVID is between the leadership and employees, where they just kind of feel that the strategy is being pushed versus how their work is like connecting to the mission and the strategy and what difference they're making in the organization. That somehow is getting missed. And so there's a disconnect and there's a trust factor there. Obviously, burnout and workload creep, everyone's trying to do more with less. And with not being able to have that flexibility of work from home as much as they're used to, that comes into play. A lot of that mid-management quality gap, where they lack the proper training of how do you manage a team, how do you support a team, how do you develop an individual. They haven't been fully trained in that, and now they're all of a sudden managing others. There's a big gap that exists there, and that is the most critical, in my opinion, group of people, because they are the ones that are frontline. They are the ones that are starting to build that next level for us. They're the ones that are growing into the leadership roles for us. And so if they're not doing a great job, we're kind of in trouble. And if they're not engaged, we're in big trouble. We've seen a lot of broken feedback loops where it's just communication top down versus bottom up. And when you run these surveys, nothing gets done, or you say you're going to do something and you don't do it. So it erodes a lot of the trust. And then there's also a recognition deficit. Like they just feel, I think employees just feel unseen, and performance kind of overshadows appreciation at times.
Is that more for like the remote employees are feeling less recognized
I think it's
because they're
across the
not
board.
getting the pat on the back from being in an office kind of thing?
I think it's across the board. I think
Really?
we're just so focused on getting work done that we're not spending enough time on the human aspects of things, which then you kind of see organizations overcorrect, right? By offering perks and fun and free food and all of this stuff, which has clearly been identified as that's not what's going to drive us. That's not engagement driving. That's not substitute for purpose and growth. And so that's, some of the things that we've seen, where you run an engagement survey on a quarterly basis, and then get a result and then correct it, but then behavior doesn't change, and that's not going to fix it either. Engagement's a daily leadership behavior. If you're not behaving in a specific manner that you want the organization to show up in, an engagement survey is not going to give you any different data to course correct that. You have to fix the behavior. Like we've seen like where organizations mistake like satisfaction for engagement. Like people are happy. Just because they're happy doesn't mean they're engaged. So that's something that
Makes
we
sense.
have to figure out and help organizations kind of think differently about. Yeah, and I think
Mhm.
the other thing is just like the inconsistency. It's just killing engagement. That you'll see them do something really great for a little bit and then kind of drop off. Or you'll see like a group running something, like a manager, individual manager group running a really cool program, and everyone's engaged and it's awesome, and then nothing happens after that, or there's no corporate intent, and it's just inconsistency kills engagement. So
Yeah, I get that part of like starting these little programs and then not following through. Or I remember doing like these surveys before as an employee, and if you don't see any kind of change, and you know that everybody else is probably writing the same thing, like salaries, like, oh, we're not getting paid enough, right? Something like that.
that's going to be on every engagement survey.
Yeah. But let's say there was something, I know I've seen it before where we all have said, hey, there's certain things we need to see happen, like we need new technology, and after a few quarters of filling the survey saying the same exact thing, you're like, why
What's the point?
would I all my notes that I've put in this survey is literally going to like the toilet.
Yeah.
Like it's no one's ever reading the notes. There's no acknowledgement of what you've requested, or that your colleagues are also griping about the same thing. And like, so I get that of like engagement drops over time, especially if it doesn't feel like there's any there's no response to everybody's ask. Like, what's the point of asking everybody if you're going to do nothing about it? So I get that.
Yeah.
you know
I mean, I think the way engagement is the outcome, not the initiative, and it
yeah.
all starts with listening, but it only works if action follows. And so our role as HR is to really take that data, but then translate it into the human story with all you have to shape it with more data, not just the survey data, and then tie that into the business impact, and then get your leadership involved so that they can start to help you build that trust and meaning, not just chasing the score, right? So it's kind of like a multi-level approach to how I would do it. If I were to say there's some takeaways on engagement, don't chase the number, chase the truth, figure out, the engagement score is really like the symptom of what's happening, not the problem. So like look for the pattern and the story behind the data instead of obsessing over the percentages. Like you could care less if you move the score by 20% or 10 basis points, but you don't know what you did and what fixed what if you don't know what the problem is. I
Yeah,
would
I mean,
say,
there's also other factors that can affect it, right? It's not
yeah,
just like example would be like inflation in the grocery stores creating everyone to spend so much on food. So now they're stressed more, and now the engagement scores go down because everybody's just like, oh, I had to pick up a second job, and
exactly.
things like
You don't
externalities,
know.
right, that are or time of year too. I'm sure like in the spring and summer, I would love to see the correlation between the season and what their engagement score is, right? Middle of winter, like in February when everyone's depressed,
Yeah. That
and
you
you got
actually
that
hit
wind
on
in
a very good
Chicago, it's
point.
deadly. The
Yeah,
wind in February in Chicago is chill you to the bone.
it's such a good
I've
point
been
that
there.
you hit on
Yeah.
because engagement is how do I feel in the moment that I take that? So you can take it 2 weeks apart, a month apart, 3 weeks apart, and answer something totally different. We used to actually run them at Deloitte. Hate to throw us under the bus. The week before Thanksgiving, because everyone's in a thankful mood, in a jolly mood. So we're like, oh, we're gonna get great scores, and we did get great scores. But I do wonder if we did it in March at the end of our crazy busy seasons, how we would feel or how those scores would measure. So absolutely, you're spot on with that.
Also, if there's been like layoffs, and I would say like in the
Yes.
big five consulting companies lately, there's been so many layoffs, right? So if you do a
Yeah.
survey
Or like in a
within a
family
few
office,
months,
one fire, one person that you let go of that they've been working with for 20 years, that
yeah,
shakes their core. We just actually sold off a couple of real estate buildings. And so we've had to let go some of the property management team. And our teams were very, I mean, it got to the point where they were like, are we all going to have jobs tomorrow? And it was like, it has nothing to do with you. We've sold real estate. Therefore, this team's no longer required.
yeah.
But that doesn't mean. So, yes, absolutely.
I guess in a smaller team, and I'll give you an example too. I've heard from some of the bigger firms, like in a smaller team, you remember who leaves, right? Everyone knows each other,
Yes.
so I get that. Like it's funny in some of these other consulting firms, and I'm not going to say the name of the firm, but like one of the big five, I'll just say they have layoffs, and people will go to meetings, and people will be missing from those meetings, and you will not know what happened to them. It's it's insane. And
Yeah.
now I
Yeah.
was talking to a person I know. I'm not gonna say who it is, and they're like, "Yeah, I would go to meetings, and half my team is gone, and there was no email to me to let me know that they're gone or let go." And it's mentally jarring and
Yeah.
psychologically traumatic when you're like, people are just disappearing. It's like the aliens are abducting these people or something. They're just gone, like whole teams, right? We're talking
Yeah.
hundreds of people, and you're like, "Oh, Jim's not here today," and you're
That's
like,
when you're
you
so
start to
short
think like,
sighted. Yeah, you're so short sighted. This
yeah,
is where I think organizations lack kind of foresight into you're dealing with a human, you're dealing with humans. So when you build things, build it around human centric models. When you do things, do it around a human centric approach. Like, would you do that to a family member? Would you just disassociate with a family member and never speak with them again and never invite them over and then like allow everyone to just guess? So why do we not apply that same way of thinking when it comes to organizations? Which is true when they are like, oh, we're love our culture, we're like a family, and it's like, actually no, you're not, because you wouldn't do this stuff to your families. If you use that word, be careful with how you use it, because you have to make sure the behavior applies to that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I worked in, won't say what organizations, but where we would have layoffs and they would literally, my leader would just send me an IM and he would say, I need you to go dark tomorrow. Do not log in, do not answer your phone, I just need you to go dark. And it would be like, okay, why? What are we doing? And then it wouldn't be until the following week that, they would be like, okay, we've had to let go of this and this and this and this and this person. And because you are part of the management team, we didn't want you to we don't want them to reach out to you and ask you questions. And it's like, well, I am part of the management team. Shouldn't I be available to them if they have questions, or if they, like, it shouldn't be okay that they have someone to go to and vent, and and so yeah, fun times.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, it's like, once you burn the culture and you create a feeling of your time could be next, I understand sort of the fear, like keeping people in line with fear, or like keeping them, always on edge, anxious in order to be able to manipulate or like control the team. But, that's not a good culture to have if everybody's kind of at each other's throats of like, I need to outperform everybody on my team because when there's layoffs, I don't want to be the one to go. Right? You got to be when you're being chased by wolves. They say always be faster than your friends.
I haven't
True.
heard that one, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
probably true. I mean, but at the same point, it's like, why create that fear-based culture? Like, if you're a performer that's performing and everybody, iron sharpens iron. If everybody's performing well, it shouldn't come down to if there is a layoff or if there's a decision to let go of a team member. It shouldn't be down to necessarily who's a better performer versus not, right? It should be like, which business case makes sense, which role should stay that impacts the business less versus, or sorry, more, versus a role that's going to impact the business less if they go. Like, it should be more business driven versus performance driven, again, unless you have someone that's an A player versus a C player. But
Yeah, I totally get it. It's wild. Sometimes you hear the stories, and I've seen a lot of them too myself, of these bigger corporations where you think that they would have a handle on everything, in terms of culture,
no, they're
programs,
just
all that
running the
stuff.
business. Yeah, they're not worrying about that.
And I guess that's also the issue with a lot of these publicly traded companies where, and it's kind of the rub between, the board of directors and the C-level people, where they're fiduciary to the results. So share price is number one, right? And that can be a bit conflict sometimes with long-term business growth, because long-term business, you're like, oh, I need to keep my people and develop them and promote them and whatnot. But short-term business thinking is, oh, our quarterly share price is down, lay off 15% of people to boost the share price. We need to do that right away. And that can be completely against your long-term growth strategy, right? Like as a middle manager, like there's always this conflict between short-term results versus long-term growth and health of the company and culture as well. And I see that definitely in like the publicly traded companies that are, they're mindful of share price. I guess in a family business, you don't really have to worry about that as much. It's more of, their goals, maybe,
I mean, you never
but
know, because if they're not growing either at some point like that, I always say always be ready
yeah.
for anything. And, an organization that's paying attention to their efficiency and restructuring isn't necessarily, to their efficiency and productivity isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think organizations have a responsibility to their employees to make sure they're aware and they're brought onto the journey and they understand the impact, and understand that there is a human cost to all of this and an organizational impact. That's, to me, a huge responsibility. And organizations that do it well are organizations that are hyper focused on their people, and organizations that don't do it well are the organizations that are hyper focused on their numbers, right? Because without the people, those numbers are nothing.
Yeah, I mean, it is a people business at the end of the
Yeah.
day, and we often forget that. But I was taking a look at some of your experience and whatnot, and I see that you moved up now to the head of role, right? So we were talking a little bit about like how do you transition in HR from like from an HR manager position, which is like that that grinder where you're putting in the hours, to the director level and then VP and then finally getting into the top seat. Like, what have you seen in terms of things you've had to do, education you've had to do, learnings, mentorship? Like, what's helped you transition? Like, what would you give advice to people that are like, how do I get to the next level in HR? Right?
Yeah, I don't know that I'm the best example for that, John. I'll tell you my story and then I'll tell you what I've seen work with others. But my story is a little untraditional. I say I'm not an HR leader by practice because I didn't necessarily grow up in HR. I actually grew up in the business, technology, and being in the business analysis and development aspect of things. And so everything that I look at has a very much a business lens to it, but I also have this huge passion of people that aligns nicely with it. And I was just lucky in my career that I've always had leaders kind of pluck me out of my role and put me into other roles where they were focusing on the strength of my skill sets versus the ability or the role, if I've done it or not. They just kind of, I had this reputation of she'll figure it out, she'll get it done, and being kind of a utility player. So I've played roles from anywhere between like being in the IT, business analysis, COO, CAO, all things in the HR talent space, all things. So, building organizations, cultures, engagement, then going on to build a brand and all parts related to the brand. So it was kind of an all over the mix. Never said no to anything. I just gravitated towards roles that had a lot of people focus involved in it. And that's how I found my path into the talent HR space. When I got there, it wasn't necessarily, again, in really anything related to HR. It was mainly culture, employee engagement. How do we get the best of our people? How do we connect our people to our strategy? That kind of work. Till I started to kind of develop and build my skill sets around how do we do talent management? How does that tie into our culture? I just questioned a lot and put myself in positions where I was always kind of learning these things. Again, I was lucky because I was in organizations that had full teams doing all of this. And so I would just shadow and learn. And I was always given the opportunity to do. And that helped accelerate my career growth, I would say, because it exposed me to all the different areas in the talent management space. Then I took on learning and development and started to tie that into talent management and doing learning and development programs, and then executive development. How do we do that? And assessments. And so I would say I had a very squiggly road up, certainly not your very traditional way up. And the way I think it was just building trust. And my CEOs and my, whether it was Blackstone or Deloitte, they would call me the utility Swiss Army knife. Use her where you need her, kind of thing, and don't underestimate her. And so, because of that trust and taking stuff on and building and succeeding in it, I was allowed to continue that growth into the role that I'm in today.
When you think about it, though, at the same time, it's like, I think the fact that you have such broad business experience, you're able to better advocate for things you want to do in HR.
Well, I can speak the language of the business
Yeah.
leader, right? So I'm not coming at them and saying, we have to run this program because of da 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 da. No, I'm coming at them with the business acumen and the business language of like, hey, have you ever thought like the ROI on if an employee is engaged or is, has high wellness scores, what that does to the productivity and then kind of what that does to the bottom line. And then we can really kind of see innovation propel in this area and tie all those numbers together or whatever, right? And then be like, there's a cool program that we can run from a learning and development perspective that could really help with that. So I come at things from the business profession, like business acumen, business aspect, and the ROI versus the HR. And I think that's helped me be able to connect with all the leaders across the board and talk to all the leaders about HR, not necessarily using HR lingo.
Yeah, no, I get that. And, just to give you some feedback from like directly hiring a lot of HR people, one of the things we see is the complaints we usually hear from CEOs coming to us is that our HR person, they don't understand the business, they would say, or they're focused on their programs very much, and they're not aligning it with our business goals as much, or they're not able to advocate for it, or they don't understand our business the way we'd like them to, and that's the trust that also isn't there potentially. That's usually the kind of gripes we hear from them when they're looking to replace their HR person, and we're like, yeah, you got to have alignment in terms of them understanding the business and being able to talk at the same level of what you're trying to achieve. So I think that's where maybe your experience really helped you to do that.
Yeah.
And so
And
you
vice
you
versa.
build their
Like I
trust by
actually
understanding what
interviewed
they're trying to do, right?
Yeah, I interviewed for a lot of different roles where it was the opposite, John, where it was like I would make it to the top two finalists and then find out that the reason that I wasn't hired is because I wasn't HR enough, right? Like I didn't grow up in HR. I don't know enough about executive compensation, or I didn't have 15 years in HR operations, or I didn't have like,
Yeah.
so I think different organizations look for different things. The organization I'm in now, he wanted someone non-traditional in the HR space, and that's what he got. So maybe I got lucky with that, and now it's given me a ton of experience that I didn't get in other roles before. that I can continue to add into my skill set. But I think every organization looks for something different. I do believe so. The colleagues that I worked with across, whether it was Deloitte or Blackstone, that did grow up in HR, what I've seen in success for them is they pick a track and they stick clear to that track, whether you're in an HR business partner and you kind of want to go on that track. If you're in HR operations and you want to go on that track, like they are very true to their tracks. And sometimes you'll see them kind of take lateral turns just to get some additional learning or additional, skill sets under their tool belt before they get into that senior level role or CHRO role. But that's another tried and true that you see very much across HR professionals that did grow up in HR, and that's what they went to school for and that's what they want to be. So I think it just depends on you. Like for me, I like a lot of exposure to a lot of different things and I like learning. I don't like staying stagnant. Titles don't matter as much to me as much as continuous growth, development, impact. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. But I would say that what I would attribute success to are great leaders that saw something and pulled me and put me into the right roles, even though I didn't have the expertise, so to say, just trusted that. My ability to say yes and try everything and learn as I go.
Well, and I was also say ability to execute, right? Like whatever
Yes,
they
that
threw
too.
at you, you get it done. It's
That
not
too.
just
That too. If
raising
I
your
failed
hand.
at everything, it'd be a different story, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, listen, people that get stuff done are what, those are the A players that you want, right? They'll figure it out. Like that's a huge thing. Curiosity, being able to take whatever's thrown at you and adapt and get it done. And,
Yes.
like those are really good skill sets to have. So
Yeah.
that's
I
great.
will thank my Deloitte business analysis training for that. Always staying curious and analyzing everything
Well, and one thing I would mention too, you were in consulting for
before
a
Deloitte.
long time. If you can make it past the 3 year mark, then you're a warrior because
15
a lot
years.
of people burn out in consulting.
Yeah,
Kudos
15
to you for
years.
that. Yeah,
Yeah. The best training grounds for sure.
nice. We'll end there and really appreciate you on the show today.
Absolutely. Thank you. This was fun.